2008 was a year that did bring a few good things. The first Android phone came out, for one, and the people at CD Projekt brought us good old games, a digital distribution platform for those abandoned games that we once loved, delivered to your computer at a fair price without DRM. It wouldn't transform the world like Steam did, but it would push it in the right direction and be a force for good. Also, the final format war ended, with the HD DVD throwing in the towel and Blu-ray reigning supreme. To this day, there has been no progress in making a replacement for it. With the advent of flash memory storage, odds are there won't be. But for the most part, 2008 was a year of disappointment, failure, and depression. Economic depression, the Big Depression, the Great Depression, you could say. All the shady dealings that the US banks had done over the past few years came to an end with billions of dollars vanishing in the housing bubble crash. People were left without their savings, without their jobs, as industries were dragged down into oblivion. The economies of many a country were sent into a downward spiral, and no one was ever punished for it. There was no justice. No bank was broken apart for its wrongdoing. No cadre of executives was sent to jail. No lessons were learned. No progress was made. Instead, the US gave those banks $700 billion in bailout money from the people they had just robbed. Romania did the same by taking out a $20 billion loan, a bunch of which instantly went to foreign banks. A decade later, we are still feeling the fallout of this event, both in our personal lives and in the video games industry as well. 2008 was a formative year for the industry. It was the year when some studios began to tighten their belt in hopes of avoiding bankruptcy, while others were being closed down due to the financial crisis and a new paradigm of go big or go home. And some developers did just that. They went home, they stayed there, and they worked on smaller, cheaper games. Digital distribution now allowed them to create cheap games from which they could get a lot more money than they could have from retail. Probably the biggest success of that year in the indie sector was Braid. Jonathan Blow's time-bending platform puzzle game was a massive hit, earning its creator over $4 million over the next few years. Though, truth be told, in terms of budget, it was way beyond what most starving artist-style developers could afford at the time. But it still set a very important precedent that would bloom in a few years. Another great example of this is World of Goo. The video games industry was facing the consequences of having games with massive budgets and no actual contingency for the possibility of them failing. But why would they? Metal Gear Solid came out after years of being in development and costing a whole lot of money and was a huge seller, even though it was, for the most part, a movie. GTA 4 broke record after record, taking Hollywood down a peg or two by out-earning the first Iron Man movie that premiered the same week. This game made over $300 million within a day. And bear in mind, last year, Halo 3 was touting the biggest entertainment launch, in terms of video games, with almost half that number. Games were being sold off the back of GTA 4 with marketing campaigns to try to show you how much more fun you could be having playing something else, something that does things differently. Such a thing had not really been seen all that much since the old rivalry between Sega and Nintendo. And this is how Saints Row survived the GTA Clone Wars, by becoming what GTA wasn't, completely off the walls crazy, to the point where the whole concept of stealing cars became just an afterthought. Grand Theft Auto 4 also contributed to another tendency of the video games industry. Even though it was over 30 years old at this point, getting almost to 40, it was in its angsty teenager phase. So everything had to be gritty and realistic. So every big budget game had to look like the screen was covered in mud or gravel. The brown filter, the piss filter, the poop filter was omnipresent and painful. It's like they were afraid that the average energy drink guzzling incapable of talking without using bro twice in the same sentence player would be offended by color and consider that it was something for kids and therefore not something they'd be allowed to admit to play in public even though they were 12. This flawed idea would sadly last for many years. Still, there were a few good games made using this horrible filter. Probably the only one where it fit quite well was Far Cry 2, where everything was meant to be rusty and run down and dusty because you were in an African dust storm most of the time. This was an open world game that may have been a bit repetitive, but in terms of the freedom it gave you, the agency that you had, it is for the most part peerless in its own series, in its genre, and in Ubisoft games in general. Valve followed up Team Fortress 2 and Portal 2 with a game called Left 4 Dead, developed by what used to be Turtle Rock Studios, now an internal development branch of Valve. It was a simple, cooperative game that had you fighting zombies alongside 3 other people. In a year or so, everyone would start going crazy and adding zombies to everything, as well as stealing the idea of a 4-player co-op game that's about survival. Even Irrational Games was considering making such a game at one point, but they gave up. 2008 was a year fueled by excess that you could see in all sorts of high-profile disasters, like Too Human, a decade in development of massive and expensive disappointment that contributed to the doom of Selkan Knights. And of course, there was Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, an MMO that Electronic Arts spent a lot of money on and positioned it to dethrone World of Warcraft, which was then getting its second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, which was a magnificently massive seller, ushering the peak of the golden age of World of Warcraft. Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, however, failed to meet the expectations of the company. It failed in a massive way. Even though it sold over 1 million copies and had over 500,000 subscribers for most of the year, and people, the ones that played it, generally seemed to like it. It was very PvP oriented, much like what Mythic Entertainment was famous for doing with its earlier work, but none of that really helped. This wasn't a great year for Electronic Arts since it posted a loss of $1 billion. A single publisher managed to lose more money making games than there was money being made in the video games industry in total about 35 years earlier. Though to be fair, it wasn't just Warhammer Online that caused this problem, but it was also games like Spore that were very well marketed and sold predominantly on lies and promises of things that were cut out of the game and never added back. All the goodwill that Will Wright had gained from creating SimCity and The Sims had gone up in smoke. But I can't really be that hard on Electronic Arts since it did publish DICE's fantastic first-person parkour game, Mirror's Edge, one of the few games of that year to avoid the piss filter and still shine because of its clean aesthetic and wonderful free-running gameplay. Something else that probably didn't help Electronic Arts all that much was that it had entered its crazy marketing phase, from which it would not emerge until many years later. It tried to promote Mercenaries 2 World in Flames by giving away £2,000 worth of free fuel in the UK, causing massive gridlock, disturbing traffic, almost inciting a riot, until the authorities told them to take a hike. There would be more incidents like this one over the next few years. Scandal was the next big thing for 2008. Everyone had an axe to grind. After years of teasing fantastic technology, Star Wars The Force Unleashed was released with a lot of uproar after claims from a developer that it couldn't run on a PC that cost less than $4,000. That's not actually what the LucasArts representative said, but it is what stuck with both camps. The PC is dead and you have to upgrade it every year and costs so much and it will explode if you don't get a new video card every 6 months crowd. And the consoles are ruining everything, they are evil, they are making games worse crowd. It's a narrative that both of them loved. Assassin's Creed's PC port also had some controversy around it, since a suspicious version of it leaked on torrents long before launch, leaving people underwhelmed by its performance and annoyed that it would somehow crash if the player tried to enter the next city, almost as if it was a demo or something. It was suspected that this was an attempt by Ubisoft itself at a stealth demo, since it couldn't be the version center replication that was claimed to have leaked, on account of it being a different version of the game than the actual final one. That year Ubisoft would promise that it was going to embrace PC gaming and celebrate it by releasing a new Prince of Persia without the DRM. Sadly, the game wasn't what you would call great. It was very beautiful, but a step down in every way compared to the trilogy spawned by the Sands of Time, and it did not sell well on any platform. But on PC, because there was no DRM, it would be easily pirated by people that wouldn't really bother finishing it. So that is when Ubisoft decided to join the PC's dead crowd, a place where you could also find Eidos Interactive, both of these companies refusing to release DLC for the PC versions of their games. DLC that included the actual ending to said games, and so Ubisoft would begin a crusade against the people that bought games on PC by using horrible DRM schemes that only published the people that legally played their games on PC. The pirates would just remove the DRM and have a better experience. The PC wasn't having a fun time in general. The latest Civilization game was a console-only title, a lot of multi-platform games were being released months and months later, and one of its greatest RPG series, Fallout, was turned into a console-style shooter. It still had very good ties to its RPG origins and to the world that it was set in, but it was underwhelming compared to the classics in terms of writing and gameplay. But it did somewhat manage to make up for part of that through its presentation and sense of style, still riding a wave of hatred for the game that had formed ever since the first trailer that showed no gameplay, just the intro. A movement defined by the phrase "Oblivion with guns," enough said, had coalesced and was proceeding to make as much noise as possible and regurgitate false claims and information that was easily dismissible about the game. People seem to have realized that through the internet they had a megaphone for their opinion, no matter how wrong it may have been. So when Diablo 3 was revealed, after years and years of waiting, people not aware that Diablo 2 had a contrast option were complaining that this game was way too colorful, not dark enough, not edgy enough, and therefore was only for kids. And evidently not good because, look, behind you, it's a three-headed monkey. It was a sad, sad time in the video games industry because of people like these. And things have yet to recover. Outrage culture would only expand until it drowned out actual grievances, until it made grounded criticism get lost in the noise and easily dismissible. A new word would soon be used to describe this: entitlement. And so everything was shut down with just that word alone. No one was listening, but everyone was yelling. Thankfully, some developers were capable of discerning actual criticism from the noise. CD Projekt took a year and spent a lot of money to do something that the video games industry did not really do. They improved The Witcher. They patched it and rebuilt it until it became perfectly playable and reasonably translated, and they did it for free. Not as an expansion, not as a sequel. The same game you bought a year before was now monumentally better, just because they cared enough to do it. Because they knew you put your trust in them when you bought that game, and they would not betray it. Even if they failed initially, they would work hard to redeem themselves. This, alongside good old games, made CD Projekt champions of the video games industry. It made people wonder, how can these people from poor old Poland afford to do this when a company that posted $1 billion in losses and still doesn't go bankrupt can't be bothered to release functional games? It's important that we also remember the good little games out there. If you can call Sins of a Solar Empire a little game, with its multi-system spanning strategy that people still yearn to see more of. But I could say that about King's Bounty: The Legend, a loving rebirth of a classic series that stood abandoned by its creators in favor of Heroes of Might and Magic, but that lived on thanks to the community that the game had built up in Russia, by people that just made unlicensed sequels until they got the license. And there was Men of War as well, a real-time tactics game and a series that would push the limit of what the genre even is. And of course, I must mention Sacred 2, a game that contained a concert by the band Blind Guardian. Few things can top that, and if I were to pick one game to best represent 2008, it would be Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, an expensive failure that seemed like a good idea at some point, and that no one had learned anything from. And that's 2008 for you. Nobody learned anything. And so the year comes to an end. Next week we ditch one bandwagon for another, and remember that games can be hard. Goodbye.